We are 16 games into the NBA season, and there is one question already echoing through the city of New Orleans. Should the Pelicans tank? The Pelicans' record at the time of recording this is 4-12. That is 14th in the West. They are last in points per game, 29th in traditional plus minus, 27th in offensive rating, 29th in defensive rating, and 29th in net rating. They're just really bad, and it's not even their fault. But whose fault is it? I don't know. Maybe somebody picked up some beads off the ground at Mardi Gras or some other superstition. Seriously, this team is cursed. The only core rotation player that hasn't missed time for them is Brandon Ingram. Ironically, the one that they didn't want to pay and tried to trade all summer long. More on that part in a bit. Everybody else on this team has been dropping like flies. They just got Trey Murphy III back. They've lost Herb Jones, DeJounte Murray, Zion, Jose Alvarado, and CJ McCollum. Basically everybody that they planned to play in their rotation. If you happen to be playing a game of pickup in the Louisiana area, you might spot the front office scouting talent. It's the kind of injury luck that leads to lost seasons. But should it be lost? Or should they try to make the best out of a bad situation? The Pelicans own their own first-round pick in the upcoming draft, and on top of that, they also own a weirdly protected pick from the Milwaukee Bucks. That pick is protected 5 through 30. Now, the Bucks are having their own poor start to the season, but they're starting to kind of resemble something that's coming around-ish. They're 6-9, sitting at 11th in the East. So it's highly unlikely, but not impossible, that the Bucks could send a top 4 pick to New Orleans. And with the Pelicans sitting where they currently are, there's at least a somewhat conceivable world that the Pelicans wind up with 2 top 5 draft picks in a draft that's considered to be loaded at the top. Now, for what it's worth, I did a bunch of lottery simulations and looked at several mock drafts, and most of them wound up with the Pelicans just having their pick and it falling in the top 5. But regardless of whether they get 1 or 2 bites at the proverbial apple, it made me wonder, what kind of rookie might they be able to add to the mix for next year? Now, every mock that I have seen has Cooper Flagg 1 and Ace Bailey 2. So, while those are probably unlikely, it's not impossible that the Pelicans wind up with the top 2 pick, so we definitely have to mention them. Cooper Flagg might be the most hyped college prospect since Zion himself, a 6'9" forward who's caught everyone's attention, including NBA stars like LeBron as part of the Team USA scrimmages over the summer. He's playing at Duke. You know who Cooper Flagg is. Ace Bailey is another long forward type, 6'10", who just played his first game for Rutgers, dropping 17 points and 6 rebounds, and I've at least seen and heard some people saying that he could actually be a threat to go number 1 despite the Cooper hype. Regardless, either of these guys would be an absolute no-brainer if the Pelicans happen to find themselves in a top 2 spot. However, even if they go full tank and don't wind up with the top 2 pick, it's really likely that they would still fall within that 3 to 5 range. So let's see who might make sense there. Since I'm no draft expert, I'm going to be relying on Bleacher Report's latest mock draft, which has Dylan Harper going at number 3. Ace Bailey's teammate at Rutgers, who's a big, scoring, lead guard type at 6'6". This could be a guy that makes sense in New Orleans in a similar mold to what they were hoping DeJounte Murray could be for them if, he didn't get hurt because this team is cursed. Or even, perhaps, what they might have thought that they could develop Dyson Daniels into if that trade didn't take place in the first place. Drink every time I say place. In theory, he'd be surrounded by defenders and floor spacers. You hope his shot develops to play off of Zion, but easy to see an enticing fit on a team that needs a point guard long term. Then at number 4, they've got Igor Demine, a 6'9" wing playing at BYU. He's Russian-born, and he's standing out as a playmaker, which definitely has a place on this Pelicans team. Granted, they have a lot of wings on the squad already, but Brandon Ingram is likely to be out of the picture, so replacing him with a younger model with a more complementary skill set could actually be very beneficial. And let's face it, if you can get a 6'9" playmaker, you do that. So then at 5, they've got VJ Edgecombe, a 6'5" off guard out of the Bahamas playing at Baylor. He seems to be your prototypical athletic guard type, the quick burst to get by, finishing above the rim, And while they could surely find a place for him if they did get him, that seems like a less appealing fit in New Orleans. They've got a bunch of dudes in the way of trying to get minutes if he's not going to project to be a real shooter or playmaker. Now, I'm not going to go through every single possibility that they could look at, but I did just want to take a peek to see how the top 5 could potentially fit into the New Orleans situation. And there's definitely some intriguing possibilities. If it was me, I'd be prioritizing point guard, some DeJounte Murray insurance, and perhaps succession plan. And then I'd move towards a stretch big to protect Zion on the defensive end and complement him on offense. Now, we've talked about these things without really addressing the inevitable. Brandon Ingram, who should be traded by the deadline, especially if the Pelicans decide to take this year as an opportunity to make sure that their guys recover and that they land a top pick at the top of a loaded draft class. He's on an expiring contract, and they clearly don't want to pay him max money, which you can't blame him for. You also can't really blame him for asking. And while it seemed like a trade would happen over the summer, that was also when they thought they were going to be a playoff team and probably wouldn't want to lose his production without getting a win-now player. If their sights are on the draft this year, it could mean that their asking price has changed from a win-now guy to youth and draft capital. With many teams that were expected to compete at a high level, stinking out of the gate, it seems like the perfect recipe to get some assets for him before letting him walk in free agency. Add those assets to a top pick in this year's draft and getting your team back healthy that you thought was going to be good in the first place, you might have something really cooking for next year. What do you think? Should the Pelicans punt on the season and start playing for ping pong balls? Let me know down in the comments.